as a species, we're not actually that impressive in many areas. We're not that fast. We're not that strong. Our senses are not going to win many competitions. And yet we've clearly thrived. So we're doing one or two things extraordinarily well. One of the things I think is closely related to natural navigation, because we are building a more interesting, richer picture of what's going on around us from the information that we gather.
Welcome back to the AskNature Podcast. I'm Andrew Howley.
And I'm Amanda Sturgeon. Andrew recently spoke with Tristan Gooley, whose books and guides have focused on natural wayfinding. He explores how we can learn to read nature through growing our observation skills in nature. I was really interested to hear his ideas for how each of us can step outside and begin this beautiful journey of learning from the more than human world that is all around us.
Hi, I'm Tristan Gooley. I've spent the last 25 years researching, practicing, and sharing natural navigation skills, the art of finding and reading clues and signs in nature.
Tristan, thanks for joining us today. I'm so excited to be talking with the person the BBC called the Sherlock Holmes of nature. One of the things that we've been really excited to talk to you about is just that your approach to the world and observing nature is so akin to asking nature for inspiration. In biomimicry, we're often looking at a specific species and seeing how it works, how it relates to things, and then we try to remember the context that it evolved in. Natural navigation seems to focus on the whole context right from the start. So what do you think is the key that makes that whole awareness come alive through seeing the world this way?
Well, I think my personal way into it, albeit spread over decades, is now the way I try and entice people into the subject of natural navigation. I say to them, look for really simple, powerful signs. So for me, it started with direction. If you're north of the tropics, the sun is due south in the middle of the day every day of the year. If you're south of the tropics, it's due north. And then you realize some star methods work. And then it gets fascinating when you realize the sky's leaving footprints on the land. So a really nice example is of all the billions of trees on planet Earth, there are no two that are the same. And every single one of those differences is a reflection of the environment that they've grown up in. So even if two trees had an identical genetic blueprint to start with, they will look quite different because they're reflecting back to us the asymmetric light, wind, water, and animal experiences they've had. So I say to people, don't fall into the incredibly fun trap of thinking I'm trying to understand absolutely everything going on in nature by looking at a leaf. We just start with, I'm going to see if I can find north or south by looking at a leaf, and then I might try and understand a bit about the weather by looking at a leaf. But in truth, a leaf will tell us a really quite complex story, but we don't want to trip over early on. We just go, okay, let's find one sign. These leaves are smaller than the leaves I saw, yesterday. Why is that? Oh, it's because I'm halfway up a mountain now. It's colder and windier. That makes sense. The leaves are smaller. It's part of my map. Just one simple sign.
That's been really interesting going through your course and listening to your books and reading through them, the way that you don't put too much pressure on any particular observation, that it's really a sum of total observations and impressions that you're getting. It's really about putting together all of those stories. So can you say a little bit about that, about how that compares to looking for individual facts versus absorbing an overall impression?
Yeah, my work, I wouldn't have seen it this way in the early days because I was just running around having fun, finding clues and signs. But now what I realize is that my work is underpinned by two pillars, really. The first is that nothing is random. By which I mean the brain is hit with so much information. By some estimates, it's dealing with 11 million bits of data per second from our senses. So what it's trying to do is bin most of that and find some meaningful pattern in what's left. But the binning gets confused with us thinking that there's randomness out there. If you look at any landscape, the brain is going to zero in on one or two things quite quickly. Motion, for example. If a bird flies past our eyes, our brain tells us, okay, identifying that's a bird. Because in evolutionary and historical terms, movement meant threat or opportunity. We had to identify it. Whereas the difference between two shades of color on the path, for example, is less likely in evolutionary terms to be life or death. But in natural navigation, what I'm saying is I'm not going to let my brain bin everything. I am going to say, why is there more water in that place? And why am I seeing the trees here slightly shorter than there? Now, we work from there to this pillar, this principle that nothing's random. There will be a reason. Sometimes it's hard to fathom, but that doesn't mean the reason isn't there. The second pillar is everything is connected. So, that sort of concept is both popular and can seem a bit glib. It's thrown around perhaps too much sometimes, but I do mean it as a fundamental principle, because what I found in my work is I started thinking that certain things were in their own category. What does the moon have to do with, bird behavior? Okay, so the moon is telling me what the tides are doing. The state of the tide is telling me how much water there is on the foreshore. That will tell me how the birds are behaving. So that's a very, very simple example. But one of the things I try to do every single day is pick two things outdoors and challenge myself to find the connection. And it's always a stepping stone approach. Sometimes it's one step, sometimes it's half a dozen. And through those two ideas, what we find is that any single thing that we focus on, normally visually, but the other senses as well, will give us a clue because it's there for a reason. A plant might tell us that, there are a lot of grazing animals in the area, but that in turn will explain one or two other parts of the environment we're in.
Beautiful example that illustrates the interconnection between humans and the rest of nature. So we're often seen as in opposition, where it's something separate, and it's so fundamental when you're trying to really understand nature or humans, particularly within it, that humans are a part of nature as much as everything else is. So much of the skills and awareness that you talk about and present do tie back to, ancient traditions and indigenous practices around the world. Can you say a bit about what have been the sources for the knowledge that you've learned and gained from others, individuals and groups? And then where have you taken it? What do you feel has been your addition to that body of knowledge?
Yeah, what's evolved for me is I think of it as a triangular model, which is that in one corner, I've got my personal experience and observations. And a lot of that is based close to home. I've just been doing some research a kilometre up the track in the woods here. Another corner is meeting people who know either a niche area, scientists who maybe studied one type of insect for the last 20 years, or one geographical area far better than I ever can. And the third corner is what I refer to as the dry research. It's very important, but it could be reading a recently published academic paper in a journal, or it could be, it's quite good fun going through some of the oldest literature out there. I picked up lots of fun and useful things in Greek myths, for example. So those are the three things. That's how I sort of operate. And what I'm bringing to it, I think, is I've put into writing one or two methods which have been lost, but I'm not claiming for a second that they weren't used by our ancestors.
I love one of the things that natural navigation and studying this and learning from your writings and courses and things brings to the way that we look at things for biomimicry is that in biomimicry, we're often looking at how a species works across the board. This is what maple trees do. And what I've loved about natural navigation is that you're really looking at the individual. You're saying, this is what this maple tree is doing, given its context. And there's a real appreciation for an understanding of the individual life histories of every organism and how they interact and how it goes from general principles to really particular expressions of that.
Yeah, absolutely. We spend a lot of our time indoors now, and it's easy to lose sight of the fact that time outdoors does leave its mark. If you even spend 24 hours outdoors, you suddenly realize, wow, if I was a tree and doing that 24/7 for 50, 100 years, yeah, I probably would show some experience. It can be as simple as the bark on the south side looking a different color to the bark on the north side. We do the same thing with people. If you meet somebody at a party, you sometimes get the sense this is somebody who's been around the block. It's etched in their face. They've seen things, and it's the same with nature.
How does this fit into your understanding of what it is to be human?
Yeah, I find it one of the most fascinating areas, tallying very much with my own personal experience, is that the brain really enjoys this. And I've been more recently getting a little bit more deeply into the idea that maybe this is part of what it means to be human. And the way I think of it at the moment is, as a species, we're not actually that impressive in many areas. We're not that fast. We're not that strong. Our senses are not going to win many competitions. And yet we've clearly thrived. So we're doing one or two things extraordinarily well. And one of them is clearly, we know it's related to our brain. And what's going on in the brain, one of the things I think is closely related to natural navigation, because we are building a more interesting, richer picture of what's going on around us from the information that we gather. To give you an example, there'll be probably a couple of dozen deer within a kilometre of me at the moment. If they hear a squirrel or a bird give an alarm call, they're going to lift their heads, they're going to tune into what's going on around them. They've gone from sort of routine feeding to alert behaviour. But what a human being's able to do is go, okay, I've heard that bird alarm call. Right, I'm going to look, I can see the bird. Okay, it's facing that way. That's confirming what I thought, which is the wind is coming from that direction. Okay. That's where the sun is. That's where the moon is. That's what the moon phase is. Okay, with this moon phase and the wind from that direction, that fishing trip I was going to do later today would be better tomorrow morning. You've got to make a lot of the information you've got. So, I get quite excited talking about this, but in a nutshell, I think the exciting thing is it is fun because it is rewarding in an evolutionary sense. The things we do that improve our chance of survival historically, I think natural navigation, i.e. reading clues and signs, is in that field. We all know that staring at a smartphone for 2 hours whilst eating a bar of chocolate is going to make us feel dreadful. If you go for a 5-minute walk outdoors and go, I'm going to try and tell the time by the length of a shadow, or I'm going to try and find direction from a cloud, the accuracy is irrelevant. You still get the good feeling because your brain's going, finally, you've remembered what I'm for.
That's great. Yeah, I had a wonderful experience yesterday morning going to a park that I've been listening to, How to Read a Tree. And everything from your book was just like cascading through my head of all these signs and just a joy of recognizing that there is a story and experience and particularity to what you're seeing. It's not a random mess of branches. Every branch is up there telling part of the story of how it's grown and what's been around it. And so I've experienced that through this. Yeah, it seems to tap into something that just makes you feel alive and good in an important way.
Yeah, and I love hearing you sort of feed that back, because that is what I'm setting out to do in my work. And it's there are a lot of people trying to convince people to reconnect with nature with just the idea that it's an automatic process. And I can feel it. I can feel it in people. I see it in people's faces. I felt it in myself 30 years ago. The word should never helps in this context, but people are saying, you should go and spend half an hour outdoors. You should go in the park. You should do this and stuff like that. It's only a small tweak, but it's a very effective tweak. If you say to somebody, do whatever you want, but see if you can find north by looking at the roots that spread out from the base of a tree. And so there's a lot of really good sentiment out there. And I don't want to take the wind out of those sails at all. But if people are just saying you should go and surround yourself with trees, I just don't think it unfortunately has any effect. Whereas if you say to somebody, I'm going to give you the tools to go and solve a puzzle, try it once, and the brain does the rest. It says, this is a game I want to play.
Let's play that game now. If you're able to, pause here and step outside. If not, maybe you can look out a window or just sit back and use your mind's eye as Tristan takes us through a walk with him and the kinds of sights that draw his attention and the questions and puzzles they inspire.
One of the great joys of natural navigation is the seasons giving and taking. If we assume there are leaves on the trees, that's a wonderful place to start. Have a look at the shape and colour of leaves, and you'll notice in the space of 1 minute's walking that there's variety. And then you just pause and say, why is that leaf different to that leaf? Nature doesn't do variety for the sake of it. It doesn't do one thing for a million years and go, on board, let's change the shape of leaves. Every shape, every colour we see is a solution to a certain problem. So we just start to go, okay, why might a leaf be darker than another one? Where's the green coming from? Where is that darkness? Chlorophyll. What does chlorophyll do? We're harvesting light. Okay, for some reason, these dark leaves here are trying to harvest light. They're making more effort to harvest light than those very pale leaves. I'm looking down in a low shady place. That's where the dark leaves are. Look for shapes, colours, patterns. Look for differences where you perhaps haven't noticed them before, and just ask yourself, why? Why is that tree so much taller than that other tree? It's in a sheltered place. I see. Okay. That tree's short because it's being buffeted by the winds, but that tree there is taller because it's in the shelter. It's a little bit further into this little woodland. Why does that bird have bright colours and the other one doesn't? Okay, there's got to be a reason for it. Just notice a colour, a shape, a pattern. Say why. And even if you're wrong, you'll still get quite a fun feeling out of it.
So much of the way that you present it almost sounds intuitive. And some of it, though, comes from deep familiarity, as you said, like going deep into the scientific literature around plants and stuff. As people are moving through and beginning to have these questions, where do they go to find answers? How much do you find you really can intuit?
Yeah, I think start with observations, look for trends, and your brain will help you because it has evolved to do this. It's looking for signal in the noise. We simply couldn't have survived as a species if every time the brain saw a landscape of any sort, it's going, there's a lot going on there, I'm just going to give up. What it does, it goes, okay, the trees have changed a bit there, why? There's water, We're all good at pattern recognition. It's what we mean by experience. Whatever you've spent a lot of your life doing, you will recognize patterns faster than the next person. And that all stems from our experience in nature. It is a nature toolkit because our ancestors had to understand, okay, we can ignore the birds making that sound, but that tick, 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 tick sound, we need to actually pay attention to that one. So it's the signal in the noise. And what we do, once we practice noticing any pattern, it starts to move from the slow, high-effort thinking to the fast, zero-effort thinking. And this might sound incredible, but it is 100% true. You start to sense things without asking for them. So if you live north of the tropics and the sun is due south, middle of the day, every day of your life that you're there, something I encourage people to do is lunchtime, if you catch a glimpse of the sun, you can say it out loud or you can say it to yourself. You just sort of go, that's roughly south. If you do that a couple of dozen times, your brain goes, you're making a lot of effort there. High effort is not good long-term in terms of evolutionary fitness. Why don't I just create a shortcut? And then you get this amazing feeling. It only takes a couple of weeks where your brain will say to you, okay, you don't get to make the effort now. I'm just telling you which way south is. And you get the same experience with animals, the alarm calls and things like that. You'll just get this feeling like, I'm going to look up at the hawk. And then, somebody will say, how did you know there's a hawk there? I didn't hear one. And you go, I'm not sure, but maybe it's because all the birds went silent. Your brain's taken the shortcut already. Observing, finding the shape, the pattern, finding meaning, however we choose to do that, repeating that process, and you start to get what, when we come across it, it seems like a sixth sense, but it's what our ancestors were doing all day, every day, and what indigenous people are doing to this day.
Yeah, beautiful. Tristan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. This has really been wonderful. I love the elements that this adds to the conversations that we've been having and are ongoing. And I think people are really going to be excited to get to start to see the world through this way. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Really, really enjoyed our chat and happy navigating to you all.
Wow, what I loved about that conversation was the simple examples that we can learn from and how quickly we could reestablish our natural wayfinding skills if we focused on it. It was a beautiful complement to our other episodes where we have explored our connection with the natural world.
Next week on Ask Nature, we'll be joined by designer Julia Watson, a global advocate for indigenous ecological knowledge and the best-selling author of Low Tech, Designed by Radical Indigenism, and Low Tech Water, a field guide for technology.
The AskNature Podcast is a project of the Biomimicry Institute. The podcast is hosted by me, Amanda Sturgeon, the Institute's CEO.
And by me, Andrew Howley, the Institute's chief editor. Our sound crew includes Lucas Murray and Simon Thomas George, who composed the music and sound design and mixed this episode. Audio production and story editing by Ayoade Balogun and Camilo Garzon. Executive production by Amanda, Camilo, and me. For more resources on biomimicry and regenerative design, visit us at asknature.org. To connect with fellow listeners and other professionals in biomimicry and regenerative innovation, join our online community at asknature.org/hive and enter podcast to receive 30% off your subscription. What will you ask nature next?